let's do a little more on politics, though, because you consider yourself a libertarian, correct?
Sort of, yes. Well, I'm more of an issues guy, but I've leaned libertarian most of my life since college.
Yeah.
And but I've changed my mind on certain issues that libertarians are not too happy about. And the reason I avoid using the term so much now is because it pigeonholes you into a category in which and then it makes it more like a religion. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, so libertarian, so you can't believe in any gun controls, right? It's like, well, no, actually, I think maybe background checks are a good idea, and magazine clips should be a certain, it's just a few things. It's like, you've abandoned us,
right?
Like what are we, a tribe?
Right, it's like a rhino. You're a Republican name only. You're a you're a lino or something.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah.
So these are these are the points you have to hold to all of them, or else you're not in our tribe.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I don't want to be in the tribe. Maybe I just want to look at issues in it. What I like about the libertarians is I don't like either the far right or far left, and so it sort of pushes toward more of the middle, I guess. The spectrum. The problem with the spectrum is that it's not really a spectrum like that. There's other places you could be. More of a diamond shaped. But nevertheless, that and things like climate change. It's like we're supposed to be against believing in climate change because we're pro-capitalist. It's like, wait, either it's getting warmer or it's not. This is just an empirical question. It has nothing to do with politics.
Yeah, does that show you, that's a good example of how politics and religion and just rationality and irrationality, it all gets mucked up. So I hear you, because a lot of people, I've always considered myself a liberal, and now I get emails and tweets every day, people going, Dave's on his way to becoming a libertarian, because I will always stand up for liberty, and I believe that the
right.
individual person ultimately, I think you could, for gay marriage, for example, while I can defend it from a liberal point of view, because I think people should be allowed to marry who they want, it's also very easily defended by a libertarian point
Absolutely.
of view, right? Or medical marijuana or things like that. So that's a place where I like that I think classic liberals and libertarians can sort of come together. And I do think that concept is sort of where politics should go in general.
Absolutely. I mean, Dr. King made the point about gay marriage back when people were saying, "Oh, you shouldn't get involved in that," back in the 60s, and and he said, no, our freedom is wrapped up in their freedom. If you can suppress somebody because of this particular way that they are, then you can suppress them for other category. We want just freedom across the board. And that's right. That's the principle.
Yeah. So is that idea, though, really what's so dangerous about identity politics? Because it's not what Dr. King said, that we have to protect everybody else. It's actually identity politics, like we got to protect ourselves. And then, what happens to everyone else is sort of secondary.
Exactly. It's just tribalism. It's just, this is our tribe. These are the things we believe. Even like the humanism, when I got involved in the whole Skeptics movement in the late 80s, early 90s, I thought, well, I'm a humanist. And then I started reading the humanist magazines and going to their conferences, talking to them. But I could clearly see they had a list of talking points that were just clearly right down the straight political left. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, what about these things over here? Those are evil Republicans, evil conservatives. Like, wait a minute. I thought you're a humanist, just science, reason. You stay out of politics.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we're political animals. We just want to be tribal. And so, libertarians, it's like herding cats. We're never going to be a big party, so I'm not even sure it's a worthwhile label.
Yeah. I'd love to figure out a way to sort of get those principles out there more, even though I don't, as I just said, I don't need the label for myself, but I think you can make a lot of strong moral arguments not using religion.
Yes.
Through the libertarian lens.
Language matters, so maybe we're in favor of liberty and freedom. Aren't you in favor of liberty and freedom? Yes.
That sounds good.
I've been trying a new one on instead of gun control, gun safety. Mm-hmm. I believe in gun safety. I think people should be trained if they have a gun. I think they should keep their gun locked up safely. Don't you agree? Anyone in the NRA should go, well, yes, of course, that's what our organization is, gun safety. That's why they were founded.
Yeah.
But control makes it sound like you're trying to control my freedom. You're going to control my individuality, and that feels wrong. So the language does matter. I think how we use these things.
So the gun argument's kind of interesting because I think there is a certain element of conspiracy theory with the people that are totally pro-gun to the point that you should be allowed to have whatever it is you want, and that one day you're going to have to rise up and fight the government and all that stuff.
Yes.
And I understand, I've said on the show many times, like, I get it. We left England, because we didn't want to live under a king and a tyrannical government and no taxation without representation and all that stuff. But there's an element of conspiracy to that the government is coming to get these people.
Yes.
Right? So the more that the government tries to get their guns, the more they want their guns. Right?
Right.
So doesn't that become this
yes.
endless cycle?
Absolutely.
So how do we break that?
Obama has sold more guns than any other
I mean, they say
president.
that constantly,
Yes,
right?
yes, it's true.
So how do we break that cycle?
Well, I think we need to get to organizations like the NRA and say you've gone down the wrong path. You know, you really should be in favor of safety, and these are the kinds of things we need to have: background checks. I mean, just change the conversation. So you're in favor of like a terrorist getting guns for free and killing people in America? You think that should be? Well, no, they should be too. Well, how can you tell if they're a terrorist or not? I mean, we just have to have background checks for everybody. They're not going to tell you at the border, yeah, I'm coming here to kill Americans. You know,
Right.
so you know, you need the general principles there. And what about, you know, you let anybody fly an airplane? Well, no, they should be licensed. Of course, they should be licensed. So I try to use those arguments, and also take the approach like I do with Christians. You know, I used to be one. I used to be a Christian. You were a Christian? Yeah. What happened? Okay. So then at least they're listening. You know, I used to be against all gun control. You know, I had guns. I grew up with guns. I had a handgun in my home for 20 years. You know, but you know, I changed my mind. You changed your mind? Yeah, I started reading, thinking about it, and looking at these studies and so on, and sort of opened the door to a conversation. But guns are almost talismanic now.
Yeah,
They're almost like religious icons of representing freedom and liberty and God and Jesus, and I don't know. It's all wrapped up in a package now.
Yeah.
That people just lose their minds when you talk about it.
So as long as we're talking guns, let's knock out a couple other just hot button political things and see if we can figure out the moral argument for them before we wrap up. So something like abortion, which as a general rule, I'm for the woman being able to make decisions about her body. But at the same point, I would understand that having an abortion at 8 months or 7 months or even 6 months, in my opinion, you're definitely destroying
Yes.
a human life.
Yep.
Now, people don't want to have that conversation,
Yes.
right? People are afraid to have that conversation. So what moral argument can you make that is for, I'm guessing you're for abortion, actually.
I'm pro-choice.
So you are pro-choice.
Yeah.
So
I'm not necessarily for abortion.
Yeah,
I'm
okay, so
pro-choice,
good
yes.
use of, that's why language matters.
Yeah.
But what moral argument can you make that's for abortion that also understands that at some point before that thing
Yes.
leaves the woman's body, it is a life
Right.
at the same point?
Well, I think the law has tracked this fairly closely to our intuitions that, you know, a third trimester abortion is wrong. You know, the gray area in the second trimester, no gray area in the first trimester, kind of tracking our sense about whether it's an individual or not. Is it a person that's, you know, thinking, cognizant, can feel and suffer? And so there, I think you can make the case, I try to in the moral arc, that that the freedom of adult women to have control and choice over their own bodies slightly trumps the rights or whatever of the fetus, just barely. I'm not pro-abortion. I am pro-choice, and it would be better if the numbers got down. But on that, if it's our goal to decrease the number of abortions, the best thing you can do is get women educated, prosperous, and access to birth control, and the numbers just go down.
Right,
by
and that's
themselves.
where we really fail as a society, right?
Yeah.
Because the same people that don't want abortions also cut sex education,
Right.
And then it's like, well, and then they cut social services, so people feel like if they're going to have a kid and not have money for it, well, they don't want that kid.
Right.
So it's like, again, it's another one of these never-ending cycles.
Then the other argument I make in the moral arc is a historical one, that historically men have always lorded it over women, particularly about sex and paternity and so on. And if you just look at the history of marriage and the history of men and women's relationships for thousands of years, it's always men trying to control women. And there's good evolutionary reasons for this. Pinker argues about this in The Blank Slate, whole chapter on sex and all that stuff. And men are obsessed with controlling women's sexuality. And this is one of the big things that have helped the women's movement is to break those chains and give women the freedom. So that's my final argument, is that in addition to the rights of the fetus, so on, all those, but just in the long run, it's better to give women more freedom than less, and to keep men out of that area of control.
Yeah, so that sounds like it would line up with some libertarian values. Because you're going
Absolutely,
to the
yes.
liberty of the woman.
Yes,
So
most libertarians are pro-choice for sure.
yeah, so
There's a few like Ron Paul, who sort of considered himself a libertarian, but he's Christian. So
Right.
see, there you see that interesting conflict.
And he was also a gynecologist, right?
Yes.
Or he is a
I know,
gynecologist, so
yes.
that's a lot.
I know.
That's a
he
lot.
must have just been like, "Rrr, rrr, rrr." Again, libertarians are all over the board. There's plenty of atheist libertarians, but there's plenty of believers who are just in the middle. They're not religious at all, and they're also very much split on foreign policy. Should we be isolationists, or do we need to go help people that need help? Like a Rand Paul, he's very isolationist. His father even more so.
Mm-hmm.
So I get those arguments, but on the other hand, don't we have a moral obligation to help people whose own freedoms and liberties are being oppressed by tyrannical dictators? Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Okay, so
And this is what that split in the left that we were talking about earlier is
Right.
really hugely about. What can we do, and are we imposing our values and all that? But let's just do one more, and then we got to wrap up. So I want to talk about a moral argument you can make on the economic level. I think is really interesting. When you hear people talking about, well, Bernie wants to tax everybody at 90%. We know it's not 90%. It's a progressive tax.
Yes.
So it's not, without getting into too much into the numbers there, but it's not really taxing you at 90%. It
Yes. progressively
increases versus a flat tax. Can you make a moral argument for economics that
Yes.
makes sense?
I'm not sure absolutely across the board, but the idea of running different experiments where, say, different states in the 50 states have different tax systems, and you can kind of look at the outcome of what happens socially in that and economically in that particular state. Does it become more or less prosperous with progressive tax versus a flat tax? I would actually like to see some states just do a straight flat tax and just see what happens.
Yeah.
Or maybe try it for a while. Maybe we should abolish the IRS, do a straight 16.5%, whatever it was. I think the Cruz wants that, right? So
Right.
Let's see what happens. Run the experiment, and we can always go back. So I'm in favor of just trying different things. On a lot of those things, I'm not sure that there's an absolute single answer. Here I like Sam's metaphor of the multiple peaks on the moral landscape. So how do we decide which peak is right? You can't. There's no right peak.
Right.
It's right for you. So this is kind of the libertarian argument. You want to paint your house red with a purple door, fine. But in our neighborhood, we don't like the houses that look like that. They all look the same. That's what we like in this neighborhood. But that neighborhood over there, make it Topanga,
Right.
Where everybody has these wild hippie homes. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
So you have different, communities that live different ways. And, I don't like the argument, well, just if you don't like America, then leave. Go to Mexico. If you like. Well, come on, my friends are here. My family's here. My kids are, come on. Let's see if we can do local politics and just run different experiments.
Yeah, and often if you're complaining about it the most, it means you care the most. So.
Yes, well, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, listen, I could have done this for another 3 hours, so you're definitely going to have to come back because I barely got to any of the stuff I
Okay.
have on my note card, so I thank you. And I want to thank Michael Shermer for joining me, and you can check out his work at skeptic.com and at michaelshermer.com.
Correct.
All right, there you go. We'll do it again next week. Thanks.